I'll never forget the look on the doctor's face when he came out, and he didn't really, he didn't have to say anything. I knew it was severe. I knew that all of a sudden I wasn't in control. I didn't have all the answers. For me, I just had to get to a place where I accepted God, pure and simple. The message that I wanted to tell him was that, how are you going to handle it when your prayers aren't answered?
That's a hint of the story that will unfold in today's episode. Let's go. Well, hey guys, welcome back to the Next Man Up podcast. I am your host, Mark Stanifer, and as always, I'm honored to be with you for another episode today. Just a quick reminder before we get into the story that will unfold today. If you want to connect with us, our email address is feedback@thenextmanup.com. You can hit our website, thenextmanup.com, and our Facebook page is @NMU Journey. Also, today's episode will deal with, in part, rite of passage and initiation ceremonies and processes and ways to lead your son from boyhood to manhood. If that's something that you've been thinking about, if you're curious, if you're wondering if this might be what you need to do as a father for your son, let me just remind you also that we have a resource that can help you craft a customized plan to lead your son from boy to man. You can find this and all the information you need on our website, thenextmanup.com/forging men. If you are at all curious about what this could look like for you, let me encourage you to visit that site, to check out the resource, and to lean into this for your son. I'm telling you, it is a fantastic tool to have in your toolbox as a father, and it's what boys need today to get them across the threshold into manhood. Okay, so for today's episode, I'm excited to introduce to you Mike Schreurs. Now, I'm not going to give you the typical bio on Mike, although I could, and it would be warranted. Some of that will come out in his story, and you'll understand the credibility and the experience that he has to be able to speak to us. What really captured me in hearing this conversation, listening to Mike's story, is that for us, he's an elder. He's an elder in business, as a business owner for 40 years or so. He's an elder in his relationship with God and what he's been through and how he documents some of that in this episode. And certainly he's an elder in relationships in life because of 46 years of marriage and because of what he and his late wife have gone through. He is an elder for us, and this elder has a story to tell. A story that we need to pay attention to. It's one that's full of emotion, it's raw, and it's real, and it is still unfolding for Mike. At the same time, it's a message that is timely and yet still timeless. It is us listening into the wisdom of our elders. And this wisdom was originally communicated in the ritual of manhood. Picture 3 generations of males around a ceremony fire listening to Mike tell his story, listening to him be courageous and vulnerable, to tackle the hard truth and to inspire those who are listening. So as you listen to Mike's story unfold, especially as we get further into the episode, Picture you're sitting around a campfire with men that are older than you, with younger men that are on their way into becoming the men that God's created them to be. And Mike is imparting this wisdom on you, on this group, around the ceremonial campfire as he tells his story. If you could sit in that posture as you listen, I think you'll be able to capture more of what unfolded and what drew me into capturing Mike's story to share with you today. Okay, that's enough from me. Let's hear it from Mike directly. Here's Mike Schreurs. Well, Mike, I appreciate you coming on the show today. It's a pleasure to have you and to capture your story. And so thank you for giving us some of your time and for your willingness to just share some of your story and some of the important things in your journey.
Oh, Mark, more than happy to. Stories are the things that make life interesting. And I'm like you. I love to hear other stories, but in this case, I'm more than happy to tell a little bit of mine.
Well, I appreciate it. And as it unfolds, I think our listeners are going to understand why I was drawn to your story and why we got connected. But let's paint a little bit of a picture for the audience as to who you are. So I know you've had a long professional, successful career. Tell us a little bit about the type of work that you've been doing professionally.
Sure. Well, when I went to college long time ago, I was kind of drawn to the humanities, and maybe that explains why I like stories. I like history. I like to try to see if there's any relevance between something that happened before and something that's happening now. I really am intrigued by that. I'm intrigued by the people that make things historically interesting. So anyway, I got to college and was studying that, probably planning to be a teacher. But I guess I discovered along the way that I needed to make more of a business decision and got into marketing, started studying marketing. Like many things, I discovered that there was a whole lot of things in business that I didn't want to do. I had opportunities to do them, but really didn't want to. And then I got involved in television, and boy, it just struck a chord deep in my heart and kind of just brought out the passions of I guess what was waiting to be exposed in and through me. Words and images and opportunities to be convincing, opportunities to, like we've been talking about, tell stories. And so that whole aspect just kind of released a little bit of who Mike is and how competitive I am. And, along the way, I had an opportunity to start a company in the television production space. We did hundreds, if not thousands, of commercials and special events, sporting events, Today shows, news events, things like that in over the course of about 7 years. And along the way, clients told me they like working with me. And so eventually I started my own company, now known as Strategic America. And we've been in business for about 42 years.
So when we talked before, just a little tie-in for the Columbus audience that's listening, you told me, if I remember this correctly, you told me that Wendy's was one of your earliest clients when you started your company. Is that did I get that right?
You did, yeah. And of course, Dave Thomas. Dave, anybody that knew Dave knew that he also loved stories. He was legendary. And when Dave came out to open up a restaurant, or when, he did the kinds of things that were important to Dave, he doesn't serve up a round burger. He serves up a square burger because he doesn't cut corners on quality. And those burgers are the best in the business, as he used to say. But if he came in a store, his first stop was generally in the restroom, not for the normal reasons, but just to find out if the restroom was clean, everything else was going to be fine. If the restroom wasn't up to his standards, there was trouble.
You probably wouldn't know this, but for a long time, there was an afternoon radio guy on the big talk radio station here in the Central Ohio area. And one of his segments was him and a couple of other guys would go to a local restaurant, and they would sample the food. They would come back and they would talk about it. And he always gave a bathroom report. That was one of his things. It was rate it cleanliness, right? Like he just he must have had the same type of thinking that Dave Thomas did. I want to know whether the bathroom's clean or not.
And like many things, it's kind of a shortcut code for, if the burgers are good, the bathrooms have got to be clean. And if the bathrooms aren't clean, well, that reflects on everything else. But we started back in the day when the commercials were, where's the beef? And Russian swimsuits and parts is parts. I'm really just talking to us.
I've forgotten about parts is parts. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I when we talked before, I did ask you about where's the beef, which was, if I remember correctly, it was right before you guys engaged with them as a provider. But I had forgotten about parts is parts. Anyway, clearly we're dating ourselves here.
We are.
So you've had a long, successful career in the business side. Tell me and our listeners a little bit about your family, because I know family plays a big part in who you are and your story as it will unfold here.
Yeah, I could make it long, or I could make it short. I'll find something in the shorter version of it. But when I was working in television, directing, one night and actually my wife worked at the TV station as well. Amazingly, I had not recognized her until one night she walked down the stairs and she was with the weather guy. And I have to say that was important, because even now I still don't trust weather guys. Some people don't like clowns. I don't like weather guys. But anyway, we met. She was a beautiful girl, and I used her in commercials. I know motivations are being questioned right now, but I then we had about a 47 and a half year relationship, a year of courting, and then 46 and a half years of marriage. And I was just one of the lucky ones in love. And about 3 years ago, a little more than 3 years ago, she passed away as a result of cancer. I've got 3 beautiful daughters and 9 beautiful grandchildren, about 7 of which are boys. And I still feel very comfortable calling them beautiful. So I've been blessed.
So one of the other things that I'm curious about is your faith journey, your faith story. I know that's an important part, and you shared some of that with me when we talked before, but how do you describe your faith journey or your faith story?
Well, like so many things with my life, they intersected with Linda's. We were both raised in good Catholic families. And Linda, when she was about 15, wanted to be a contemplative nun and went to a prep school in Minnesota to allow that, but she was too young. And after being there about a year, she discovered she was too young, so went back to the parochial school that she was a part of. Thankfully, for our future, that she didn't end up being a nun. But she always did have this really strong intercessory prayer gift, if you will. It may have been a burden as well, but it was a gift. And for me, I would say that I was, when we met, the reason that we both knelt down at our couch and accepted the Lord on December 19th, 1973, was that I was asked to record a church production. And we both, having been raised Catholic, really didn't understand so much the evangelical side of the faith community, but these people just absolutely loved us and loved us into the kingdom. And in the midst of all of that, our faith grew. And for, I would say, I don't know how long, but it felt like we were almost in a cocoon. Whenever the church was open, our kids and us were there if I wasn't traveling. It was just a way of grounding us and making sure that we were surrounded by people who could help us answer questions and help us kind of get our legs under us in the faith walk.
And obviously, it's continued to play a significant part in the man that you are today.
Yeah, there were a number of things that kind of were important moments or important steps in our faith journey, and one of them was that. And Linda oftentimes led the way. She started doing a fast. I thought, well, fasting is fairly extreme, if you will. And yet I remember getting up one morning. She was always up early, reading the word, praying, whatever. And I felt so strongly the sense of the Spirit. I knew she was praying for me. What ended up was that she did a 40-day fast. And essentially that was just water and juices, nothing solid, nothing substantive. But it became a way to kind of take the flesh, if you will, out of the equation and really listen to the Spirit and give the Spirit prominence. And along the way, before long, I agreed to do a fast as well. I didn't agree. She didn't ask me to do it, but I did agree to it. And along the way, we did 5 40-day fasts that I think were invitations for the Lord to just do his work in us, whatever that might be. For me, it was different than Linda, and it's different for each and every one. But you kind of come across those things that you say, boy, I really ought to get rid of that. I ought to get rid of that way of thinking, or I ought to get rid of that response to how I might react in an emotional or a non-spiritual way. And that's what fasts do. So it was a good chapter over many years that I think helped define my faith walk.
So I'm gonna take you to, with that as backdrop and some context for who you are. I want to take you a little deeper into Linda's story, or into, I guess it's really your story, but there's this moment where she's diagnosed with cancer. And obviously that set a course for the rest of her life and for yours. How did things change for you guys when that diagnosis came?
Well, I can tell you what I was like beforehand. I always kind of felt like, it's the start of a new year. I'm going to make this year better. I'm going to do more. I'm going to kind of raise the bar a bit, and I'm going to accomplish more than I did last year. And then all of a sudden, along the way, Linda began to have severe abdominal pains. Went to the hospital. Her lipids or the measurements were just off the chart. Where normal, something might be 40 to 60, it was like 13,000. And she was having just extreme pain. We didn't know what it was. And frankly, over the course of about a year, it happened about 4 times. And after about the 3rd time, we just talked to the doctors and said, listen, this is too random. It seems like we don't know what we're doing. Can you give us a referral to another institution, another system? And they did. And even then, they were so close to seeing the problem, but they couldn't see it. And they did an ECRP procedure, and I'll never forget the look on the doctor's face when he came out. And he didn't really, he didn't have to say anything. I knew it was severe, and the diagnosis was pancreatic cancer. And back then, the survival rate for 5 years was 4 to 5%. Today, years later, it's now 10 to 11%. It's still incredibly meager. But what really changed in that was the way I thought. I knew that all of a sudden I wasn't in control. I didn't have all the answers, and I was expected to be the protector. I was supposed to be the one who kind of, took the brunt of whatever it was that involved change and protect my wife and my family. And then all of a sudden I discovered, well, it's bigger than that. And so, our faith and our trust in the Lord was strong. And in fact, even became stronger during that time. But there was not much we could do about it. And unfortunately, I thought, well, I can still influence God's plan. And I remember talking to Linda even, 4 years after the surgery. We had been blessed by having that 4 years, but she was in the process of dying. And I said, honey, the only answer that works here is we've got to believe God for a miracle. So I was still in denial that this could be influenced. And that was really important because I felt very vulnerable at that time. I felt that I wasn't the person I needed to be. And I couldn't control or force my will upon something that was much larger than my perception and my hope. And so I had to adjust. And frankly, as you can perhaps tell, I'm still adjusting.
Yeah.
It's just a life lesson that if I hadn't experienced it, I probably would have thought I could change the world in whatever way I wanted to prescribe that change. But after losing Linda, after a multi-year battle, I really never lost faith. I just seemed to lose some clarity and some intensity and some purpose. And the Lord still wanted me to know that He loved me and that her death into glory really wasn't my fault. It's just what He wanted to do. And I needed to gain His perspective.
It's interesting that you use those words there. Did you feel as if you dropped the ball or it was your fault because fill in the blank?
Oh, sure. You question everything. You question, did I wait too long to make the decision on the doctors in the hospital? You question, did I pray enough, or did I, was I too sorrowful rather than being hopeful? You question all of those things. And that's just, I think, human nature in many respects. But I found that, for me, I just had to get to a place where I accepted God, pure and simple. And not what He could do for me. And not what, my prayer was or wasn't. I could look at it, diagnose it, break it down, blah, blah, blah. But I just needed to say, Lord, if this is your will, then I guess I'm good with it.
What was it like when you came to that conclusion or came to that moment? Maybe you're still growing in that moment, but what was it like for you when you came to that moment?
Well, I'd be lying if I didn't say it was challenging, but I'd also be lying if I didn't say that's the only solution that works. Otherwise, I'd be driving myself a little batty, a little crazy. I mean, really, all I can do is accept the fact that He loves me, that He loved her, and that she's truly with him now. And that's, I guess the legacy hope, the eternal hope that we all have is that, this faith is not just something that's a cultural thing. It's an eternal thing. And I needed to change my perspective. And it was time for me to figure that out, because along the way, in the 4+ years that we were battling it, we claimed every scripture, every Bible verse that supported healing. We prayed it, we prayed it, we prayed it. I equate it sometimes to the fact that I was leaning so far forward in this. I felt like that ski jumper, Eddie the Eagle, who was leaning so far forward that if the wind quit blowing, or when he came to a stop, he'd fall directly on his face. And that's kind of how I felt too. So I just needed to agree with God that, if this is your plan, then I have to be okay with it.
I've never walked in that scenario. So I can only imagine the challenge and the difficulty. And yet what I heard, even in the midst of the pain and the questioning and the approach to life that had worked up until that point, and then it didn't work anymore with the diagnosis. Even in the midst of all that, God still met you and says, I'm with you, and I have a plan and I have a purpose for you too, even through all this pain. And even though my direction is different than what you're asking for, I'm still meeting you. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm hearing that in your story as it comes out.
Yeah. And it was mental, and it was spiritual, and it was relational, and it was just all encompassing. I had situations, a lot of well-meaning acquaintances and friends, and sometimes you'd see them and they'd kind of avert their gaze so that they wouldn't have to engage me in whatever pain I was going through or whatever I was going through. And on other occasions, I found situations where, toward the end, my brother used to come over every morning at 7:00, and we'd walk in the morning, and he'd be walking around our development with his sports coat and his white shirt. And I'd be walking in my jeans and my, whatever the apparel of the day was for taking care of Linda. And it was just a perfect metaphor for, how I'm going to get through this. I'm going to get through it with people who care. And our walks sometimes were just absolutely quiet. And our walks sometimes were prayerful. And our walks sometimes were, just almost normal. But the just walking alongside somebody who's going through, it's just the perfect metaphor for what I needed. And even, after the fact, my brother John would say, "Hey, mind if I stop over and we take a walk?" It sounds a little bit like the Field of Dreams spot when the star Kevin Costner meets his his father and says, "Can we play catch?
Do you want to have a catch?"
Yeah, want to have a catch. That's right. It's a perfect metaphor for how I got through it. I got through it with a lot of love, a lot of support, sometimes without anything being said, and sometimes just a lot of listening.
Yeah. Well, let me just pause here and honor you and thank you for your willingness to be vulnerable and share that story. Obviously, it's still pain that is real. You can't do life for 46 years with somebody and then be detached and it goes away overnight. And so thank you for the courage to just share your story and to be vulnerable with everybody and anybody that will hear it. And when we first talked, it was the passion and the emotion in your story that drew me into your story. But as you know, we got connected through somebody else, a recent guest on the show, because you were part of his son's rite of passage event. And you told me earlier, that you had a message for this boy, but it was probably not the message that he expected. It's probably not the message that his dad expected. And yet it was the message in the role that you played in that ceremony for him. It was the message that you had for him. What did you tell him, Mike?
Well, it was an interesting ceremony. I'd never experienced anything like this before. And I thought, boy, this is something I probably even need to do with my own grandchildren, because it was one of those, if you will, legacy gateways. And everybody went around the campfire, if you will, and spoke truth. And I knew I probably could have done something that was maybe along the lines of a success quote or something like that. I knew I could have done it, but I really also knew that the message that I wanted to tell him was that how are you going to handle it when your prayers aren't answered? How are you going to react as a man of faith? What happens when your prayers aren't answered the way you expected them to? What happens then? Are you going to give up on God? Are you going to give up, period? Because there will be occasions and situations like that. And really, from my point of view, I wanted to be cool. I wanted to be not as emotional, but all of a sudden I was back in the place where I was so vulnerable. And I really felt that the lens of God and eternity was really what I needed to show this young man. And I just needed him to say that when that happens, don't give up on your faith. Don't give up on God. Don't give up on your family. Don't give up on those things that will help you get through this, because you will face those times. Everybody does. And not too many of us know about it beforehand. But when it happens, it gives us an opportunity to probably be more authentic than any other time in our life. That we recognize that maybe we're not in control of everything. Maybe we can't protect everything. Maybe we can't really even prescribe how we would like it to go. But it does. It gives us that opportunity to do that. And so prepare yourself for that. Prepare yourself through the word, prepare yourself through prayer, prepare yourself in the relationships that you're going to build over the years. And then when something like that happens, then you'll have all of the places where you can lean on to get through it.
So you got me sitting around the campfire in my mind, listening to you share that. What was it like for you to have that moment in that sacred space for this young man in becoming? What was it like for you to be able to share your story in that space? And then what do you think it was like for him and for the other men that were there and participating?
Well, it was so emotional. Sometimes I'm not even sure that I can put it in perspective of anyone else. I saw his face because I was looking into his face and speaking into it. And I was kind of thinking, as I was the older member of the group and I was the last one to speak, I was trying to think, my goodness, life happens so fast. You got to make time for those things that really matter. You got to make time for things that happen along the way that either you can prepare for or not prepare for. And eventually you're going to get to the point where I'm at, where you say the most important thing is really legacy. And how is it that you put this into a context or into a perspective that makes sense to a young 13, 14-year-old boy? That I just have to leave up, I guess, to the Lord, to the Holy Spirit. But I was gripped by the opportunity to speak truth into young Dean's life. And I was gripped by the opportunity to be as genuine as I could be, as real as I could be. And in that, to just give myself over to it. If that embarrassed me or whatever, or if it even embarrassed him to a degree, I think it kind of captivated him. And I think it captivated the other men around the campfire as well.
So picture you've got an opportunity to look into the eyes of a young father, a young husband, a young professional, 20, 30 years younger than you. And you could impress upon that young man one or two important things. What would it be, Mike?
Well, first of all, life happens fast. Actually, I think the folks at Nationwide used that as a theme about 5 or 7 years ago. It really does. It happens so fast. And be prepared, if you can, to slow it down and to capture those moments. And be prepared to welcome the dimension of faith into your life, because that dimension of faith makes sense of all of it. It's the only thing that makes sense when you go through tragedy. It's the only thing that makes sense. You've just got to say, Lord, I trust you. I trust you with what's happening. And I trust you, Lord, with your love for me. And I trust you, Lord, for the grand plan that you have for me. And so I think it all comes back to faith, and it comes back to allowing ourselves to expand that perception, that dimension of what we can control and what we can't control. And when we can't control it, then we've got to have that broader perspective to look to and to and to learn from, and to realize that that we aren't in control.
So we started with your love and draw towards story. Obviously, storytelling has been a significant part of the professional work that you do. And here you are with a story that is still very fresh and recent with the loss of Linda. And yet you were able to take your story and share it with Dean and all the other men that were there in that ceremony. And Mike, you've shared your story with us today, and we're able to capture it. And I don't know who will be listening, but I always trust and believe that there's somebody out there for whom this story was intended. And so again, thank you for courageously and vulnerably sharing your story, and for the encouragement that it is for those of us that are coming behind you to take that wisdom, to take your lessons and learnings, and apply them today as best we can. So anyway, thank you for your story intersecting now with ours.
Mark, I'm glad to do it. I think there's a scripture I'm reminded of that says, there are many teachers, but not many fathers. And really, this is kind of a fathering story, if you will. And we need fathers. We need fathers both in the natural and in the spiritual realm. And I believe that's what this is all about.
Well, I agree with you. And I appreciate you for fathering some of us a bit further in our journey today. And guys, I'll make sure that that Mike's information is in the show notes so that you can access it there. If something that he said resonated with you, you can reach out to him. Mike, once again, thank you, and I wish you all the best as your story continues to unfold and impact positively those with whom you have influence.
Mark, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Appreciate it.
Well, as you listened to Mike's story, picturing yourself sitting around a campfire, I hope it spoke to you. I hope you heard the honesty and the vulnerability in addition to just the emotion of what Mike was trying to communicate about what happens when God doesn't answer, or when God's plans are different, or when he says no. Before we end here, I wanted to just recap the few things that Mike mentioned there at the end about speaking to us, speaking to younger fathers, younger men, that wisdom of the elder. And let me just recap the three things that he mentioned. First of all, he said, life happens fast, so find ways to slow it down and to be present in the moment. The second thing he said is to really understand the dimension that faith plays in our lives. Essentially, at one point, Mike said, I just simply had to accept and believe and to trust in God. And then the third thing he said was this: understand what you can control and release what you can't. Timeless wisdom that's timely for us today, regardless of our situations, regardless of where you find yourself, the circumstances surrounding you at this moment. This is timeless wisdom. And so I hope you captured that. I hope this resonated with you, and I hope you can move forward with that insight and that wisdom from our elders. Okay, let's put a bow on it here. Thank you for being with us once again for this episode and for being a part of the community that is changing the world by raising up healthy and godly men. We will be back once again next week, same bat time, same bat channel. Until then, adios. To send us your comments or questions, you can email us at feedback@thenextmanup.com. The theme music is by Jacob Stanifer at Jacob Stanifer Music, and this show is part of the NRT Podcast Network.